What does the Bible say about women as preachers? That is a great question.
For two dudes sitting up here, I think
Yeah.
that's an excellent.
There are, anytime, so for those of you who don't know, sometimes we have a female speaker here at Sun Valley. Her name is Megan Marshman. She's very gifted. She's actually in high demand. She just came out with another book, and we love Megan and know her through some different things. Actually, Robert introduced me to Megan. But there are a few verses in the Bible that say women are not supposed to talk in church. At the same time, you read it and you go, oh, women aren't allowed to talk in church. So a bunch of you, if you believe that, you're already in sin today because you're whispering to somebody right now. Why are you talking, ladies, right? It's how far do we take that? A lot of things in the Bible, you have to understand the context, what's around it, and then what was going on in that particular situation in that particular time. There are other verses in the Bible like this one. This is Acts chapter 2, verse 17. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions and your old men will dream dreams. To prophesy is to speak on behalf of God. The thing about the New Testament that people don't realize, because sometimes people like, oh, Christianity, it puts down women. No, it doesn't. It actually does the opposite when you understand it. It empowers women. I'll give you one example. The first person to see the resurrected Jesus was a woman. She's commanded to go back and tell the men what she's seen. Okay? In that day and time, women were considered property. So, by the way, if you were making up this story, you wouldn't go with that angle. Because a woman's testimony would not have been allowed in court. Women were considered property. And yet, throughout the New Testament, you have women sitting at the feet of Jesus, the story of Mary and Martha, if you want to look that up, which means he's teaching them, he's discipling them, unheard of in that day and time. You have a woman who gives the first testimony to the resurrected Jesus. You have Paul acknowledging women throughout the New Testament for their leadership and for their generosity. There's a woman in the Old Testament who God calls a prophet. And so you have to look at Scripture as a whole. And then you have here what I just read, that women will prophesy, which means speak on behalf of God. And so here at Sun Valley, here's where we are on it. I do think there's a biblical principle throughout the pages of Scripture that men are, here how I'm going to say this, that men are to bear the weight of the responsibility of leadership. That seems to be a principle throughout. Also, there's a principle throughout that God has gifted and empowered women. And so at Sun Valley, yes, do we have a female communicator? Yes. I think it's pretty obvious that she's gifted by God. Any of you guys that have heard her, you're like, I'm pretty sure God is speaking through her right now. How many of you have had that experience when Megan preaches? Okay, so we're just empowering that and honoring that. And at the same time, the lead pastor is a dude. And with that, there's a group of guys that carry the weight of responsibility of the church, and at the same time, we want to empower women that are gifted by God. So that's my answer.
Yeah, and a lot of times too, what we're doing is we're taking some of these verses and trying to apply it to a modern context. Even how we do church looks different in our current context than it did in New Testament times. But there's evidence throughout the Bible that there were house church leaders who were female. And they're mentioned by name, and Paul addresses them in his letters. And so even in the early church, you had these, and think of it more like a small group. You had small groups meeting in homes, and there were women who were leading some of those small groups. Now, culturally at the time in the synagogue, you would have men leading in the synagogue, but with the New Testament church, the early church, you had women in leadership as well. And so again, sometimes we take that out of context and we try and apply it to the setting and go, well, nobody on stage can be a woman or whatever. That's just not what the Bible's teaching us.
Yeah. There it is. If you want to study that, great. If you go to some resources, they're going to disagree with what Robert and I just said, and that's okay. We'll all answer to Jesus and give an account for how we did things. But that's the way we see it here at Sun Valley, and I feel very confident in it. If you're like, well, is there any gender-specific role at Sun Valley? Yeah, it's the lead pastor. So again, that's in that principle of weight of leadership. But with that, we want to empower women who are gifted by God.